Hi, everyone. We're so happy to have you here today. This is our first session of our Ask the Expert series. If you're new to our webinar series, welcome and thank you for joining us. Criterion Edge runs multiple informative webinars throughout the year. For today's live Q&A topic, we'll be discussing the importance of clinical data, including sources of data, literature searches, weighting and appraisal, and effective presentation in your clinical evaluation report or performance evaluation report. Our presenter today is Criterion Edge's president, Lori Mitchell. She is the founder and president of Criterion Edge. And we are a global medical and regulatory writing and safety services firm serving the medical device, pharmaceutical, and biotech industries. Lori has over 20 years of experience in medical writing, safety, and pharmacovigilance management and regulatory reporting. Having provided regulatory and medical writing solutions to many pharma and medical device companies, both large and small, she is a proven leader in designing practical strategies to meet current global regulatory challenges. Lori is also a published author and holds a Master of Nursing from UCLA. And with that, I think Lori has a little intro for us today.
Hey everyone, this is Lori. Thank you so much for joining today. We've gotten a lot of questions already coming in, and I think it's going to be a very productive, we hope, productive and informative and useful for you webinar. So this is a 30-minute live Q&A, as it says on the screen. Do you have questions on, generating, collecting, analyzing, and assessing clinical data pertaining both to the IVD world or the medical device world? We're agnostic about this because those activities are really quite similar between the two industries. We're looking at what are the best practices for conducting literature searches and how you can effectively present your data in your clinical evaluation or performance evaluation reports. So before we move to the first question, I'd like to, if you can, give me a moment to clear up some nomenclature or some wording, because people use some terms differently than others. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the nomenclature around the types of devices. So I see in the questions legacy devices, comparator devices, equivalent devices, competitor devices, and benchmark devices. So from my point of view, a legacy device, or is it sort of like a benchmark device? These are older devices that have been on the market for quite some time. So if the question says a benchmark device or it says a legacy device, I would consider those the same thing. Equivalent device is very specific and is probably compared to or equivalent to the word comparator device. Some of you use the word comparator device, and in my brain, comparator and equivalent are the same. So let's just agree on that. And a competitor device is not an equivalent device. It's not a comparator device per se. It's a competitor to the subject device under evaluation, your device, in other words. So I hope that might clear up a little bit about where my brain is with using some of those terms. And now we can move on to the, one other point is that a lot of you have asked generally about effective data presentation. I'll just say a couple of words about that. Effective presentation of any report, a PDR and CER, or the SVR, or any of the feeder documents within any kind of whatever industry you're in. Effective communication to me is about telling a story and making sure it's very clear to the reader, which the audience here is the notified body. I think for most of us, we're really thinking about that end audience, the notified body reviewer. So make sure your presentation is clear, it flows well, it tells a story. don't feel bad or funny about repeating information, such as we just told you that all these devices are equivalent, and we explained it above. We're going to tell you again it's equivalent. These notified body reviewers sometimes they're rushed, they're tired, they're cranky, they're hungry, they're distracted, and it doesn't hurt to be very clear and to repeat sometimes things that are very important. So that's a tip from us. And one other person with the pre-questions asked a kind of a broad question about time management. I'll say one last thing. Time management in getting all of this work done is critical to your success. And what I have said in some of my other webinars is, if you think internally that a task or a project is going to take you a month, you should double that. Things happen, things come up. It really is, time is your enemy or it's your friend. So try to make it your friend and give yourself plenty of it. Time management is definitely an issue. We could do a whole conversation on that alone. So having said all that, thank you very much for your attention. I'm looking forward to your questions. Olivia?
Thanks, Lori, for that clarification and those helpful tips. We'll go ahead and get started with our first question. Can you see the first question on my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Our first question today is, how should I weight the contribution of each data set?
Well, this, of course, is a very foundational question, and I'll unpack it a little bit here. First of all, you should weight every data set. Every data set that is in the CER or PER needs to be weighted. If it contributes to the analysis of the safety and performance of the device. In other words, technical data is more informative and is usually not required to be weighted and appraised and analyzed. There's not really a weighting tool or an appraisal tool that does well with just benchtop technical data. So we're talking about clinical data here, number 2, and every data set should be weighted. And again, the bar would be, are those data sets contributing to the analysis of the safety and performance of the device? Now, how should you weight that? You need to choose a validated tool for weighting and appraisal. And we commonly use, if you look back at Appendix 3 of the MDCG, the Medical Device Coordination Group, it's dated 2026, so April of 2020, that guidance document, it talks more about all data sets being weighted and appraised, including PMS complaints, vigilance data, and also there's a couple of questions about PMS data. Those data sets need to be weighted and appraised because under MDR Article 248, those are considered data. So they meet the definition of clinical data and thus must be weighted and appraised. So look at the MDCG weighting and appraisal criteria, and what is the difference between weighting and appraisal? There isn't much difference, but the weighting of it has to do more with the level of evidence and its contribution to the analysis. So that's a weighting. Is it very high level of evidence, or is it a lower level of evidence? So that's the weighting. And then the appraisal aspect gets into what are the particular details of domains such as appropriate patient group, the type of study, is it the right device, what are the statistical and clinical significances of all of that. So we like to use that particular weighting and appraisal methodology, and I highly encourage you to look at it. It looks a little daunting, but it's very widely accepted by the notified body, and there's usually we have not experienced any pushback on that at all.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. I'll move on to our next question, which is, what are the requirements for data search under the MDR for clinical evaluation report and for state-of-the-art document?
Okay, great question. And I will alter that question a little bit and expand on it to say this also applies for our colleagues from the IVD world out there. And in this case, for clinical evaluation report, in this question, it would be your performance evaluation report. And for the state-of-the-art document or section of the CER, in IVDR, there is the scientific validity report. So in my nomenclature, if we're talking about MDR and state-of-the-art, for those of you from the IVD space out there, be thinking of your SVR and be thinking of then how that translates into your PER, because you're going to have to repeat that scientific validity and state-of-the-art in your PER. Now, to answer the question, what are the requirements for the data search, for searches? For the clinical evaluation report, we always say there are 3 searches that need to be performed for a CER. One is on the competitor devices, one is on the subject device, and one is on to help inform the state-of-the-art story. So I'll start with that one. What do I mean by the state-of-the-art story, and how is that different from those other 2 device searches that I just talked about? So in an SVR or in a state-of-the-art section of the CER, we have to tell the story of the device under evaluation, its background, the medical conditions that it treats, its technology, the epidemiology. You're telling a full story of the type of different treatment modalities that are available for someone who, say, has cardiovascular disease. And as you move down the funnel and you move down towards landing in the narrowing down to where your device sits, and let's just say for this purposes of this, we're talking about a cardiac stent. So at some point you're talking about cardiovascular disease, you're moving down the funnel of the state-of-the-art, and you're talking about different treatment modalities, and you finally landed at your treatment modality type, which is a cardiac stent. So to tell that story, that's a state-of-the-art search. That state-of-the-art search is using PICO terms. It's looking for guidelines, professional standards. It's not data-driven. It's not the data-driven search. It's the telling the story search, the one that I just described. So that's search number 1. It can be handled differently because it does not include data, and it doesn't need to be documented as rigorously in the CER or any of your documentation as the next 2 that I'm going to talk about. The 2 that I'm going to talk about next are the competitor device and the subject device. Those searches, those are 2 separate searches. And because you are extracting data from those, there is a lot of very rigorous documentation that both MDR and IVDR require, because MedDev 2.7/1 Rev 4 requires it. So these are the requirements for data searches for an MDR and an IVDR compliant documents.
Thanks, Lori. Our next one is a good question. What if there is little to no published data, especially recent publications on your subject device, but it is an established technology or material that has been on the market for many years, like a legacy device?
Right. So we had many questions about this. So legacy devices, benchmark devices, as I had said, that's why I started out with that little primer on let's get our terminology aligned. So the legacy devices, there are many on the market. And falling into my categorization of a legacy device is, it crosses over into where are the data for a legacy device. No one's publishing on it anymore, either because it's an older device or it is a simple device. And now I'm going to use the example of, say, a guide wire to put that stent in, that cardiac stent in. Nobody publishes data on guide wires. They are very little. They publish on the stent, but not the accessories or the useful devices that are procedurally related. So there's a couple of ways that you can approach this. What if there's little or no, especially on your subject device? So the question is sort of half-assed, is like, what do you do about data then? I think is what the rest of the question means, is like, how do I look for data? And how do I establish the safety and performance of my legacy device? Well, let's take the guide wire for an example, or a tool or an instrument that's commonly used in a procedure, orthopedic or otherwise. Procedural success could be a surrogate measure of performance of your device. In other words, if the procedure in which your guide wire was used was successful, that implies the surrogate that your guide wire performed as intended. So think through that concept a little bit, and that's a performance. And then you can also look for safety data. May be harder to find, but you've got your PMS data to fall back on for safety. So there are creative ways, is my bottom line answer, to tackling this paucity of recent data on legacy devices or simple devices. Next question, Olivia.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, what are the most critical things to watch for in a CER or PER, and how are they different?
So this sounds like a really huge question, but I'm glad that we chose it to talk about, because I'm going to take a high-level discussion. In our opinion, at Criterion Edge, the most important parts of the evaluation report, whether it's the performance or the clinical evaluation report, fall into a few categories. Obviously, the sufficiency of the data, clinical data that establishes and is clearly weighted, appraised, and analyzed in the context of acceptance criteria from your competitor data, and analyze to then thus draw the conclusion over and over again for every data set that it helps inform and establish the safety and performance as intended of your device that's under evaluation. So obviously data. But there are a couple of other things to think about. One is the state-of-the-art section. The state-of-the-art section to us is one of the most critical sections of a CER or the PER, because it puts the device under evaluation within context of its competitors and its competitive landscape. And that is where you're setting the safety and performance objectives and the acceptance criteria by which your subject device's data will then be measured to answer this question. Is your device safe and performs as it's intended within the state-of-the-art landscape? The state-of-the-art section of the CER and PER sets your device up to be a part of a state-of-the-art milieu of within its competitors. So that's where you start that story. The other and the third section is the risk-benefit analysis, because it all sort of gets down to that at the very end of the CER PER, where you are then analyzing all of the data that you've just looked at and all of the information against and looping back into your risk-benefit documentation within your own QMS. In other words, you're saying, here's what we found. We found these these new potential risks. We found these benefits. We see that they are justified by data. And that begins now the loop back into your company's internal risk management documentation. And that's the third section of the PER or CER that's very important.
Great, thank you. I think we have time to get to a few more questions. So our next one is, when incorporating technical expertise or qualitative data into the CPR, are there any guidelines on how to present this data?
So the CPR for the medical device folks on the call is the clinical performance report in IVD. So in incorporating technical expertise qualitative data into the CPR, are there any guidelines on how to present this data? Well, the short answer is that qualitative data, if it's data and you intend to present it in your analysis, it needs to be weighted and appraised. So first of all, weight and appraise it, and then qualitative data, because it's going to come up as a low level of evidence and contribution, shouldn't be included in your CPR. So you need to really look closely at the use of qualitative data because of its low level of evidence. You have to weight and appraise it either way. And if you have nothing else, then put it in and talk around it. But it is a weaker story, that's for sure.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, what about CER devices?
Well, I'm going to ask that we skip this question because I'm not really sure what about them. I mean, similar devices are equivalent devices, so I'm not sure how to answer the question. So can we move on to another one?
Of course. Our next question is, what are the key points to be considered when analyzing literature data?
The key point here is that you have established somewhere in your CER or PER the acceptance criteria against which you analyze your data, subject device data. And if you need or want more information on how to identify acceptance criteria, where it comes from, even what it is, I don't have enough time to explain that on this call, but we just put a webinar on yesterday about that, and we've got a lot of resources on our website about acceptance criteria and what it means. MDR and IVDR are most definitely looking for that, safety and performance objectives, and the acceptance criteria by which those objectives are measured. And I would encourage you to look on our website, see our white papers, or listen to recent webinars we've done on that.
Yeah, we can definitely send some of those helpful links in the chat as well. Our next question is, what strategies do you use to effectively present clinical data by indication? Some of our devices have 6 to 10 indications.
Yes, so you're going to have a long CER or PER is what I'm going to tell you right now, because this starts in the state of the art section. Is when you are telling the story of the state of the art of your device, each indication that it is intended to be used in. Again, let's go back to that cardiac stent. It may be used for cardiovascular disease. It may be used in the left main coronary artery, which is a very specific indication. So you have to go in the state of the art and discuss every single indication. You have to. Your notified bodies may be cranky if you don't adequately discuss all indications for use for your device. So starting in the state of the art and then moving through, and how does that trickle out through the rest of your evaluation report? You must have data to back up the safety and performance of the device in each indication. And if you don't have it in every indication, you need to get creative about that. It's like, well, how can you, this is sort of an existential issue, because if your IFUs all list if lists 6 or 7 indications for just one device, then you need to look at your data sets, your clinical data sets, and make sure that you have data addressing the safety and performance of each one of those indications. And then you effectively, the question is effectively present, you break those out into each indication. In other words, here's the data set for indication 1. Here's the analysis of indication 1, the weighting and appraisal of those data sets. Here's the one for indication 2, and on and on. You have to be very methodical in your presentation and clear.
Great, thank you. We only have about a few minutes left, so we'll get to the next one. Do you have any feedback on successful CERs under MDR or BSI review?
We do. We are obviously, as a vendor, we are not sitting at the table in discussions with our clients' notified bodies. However, what we do see routinely and then speak to and mitigate and remediate are notified body feedback questions. We have dozens, if not even hundreds, of examples of those. So what probably I would say is a very broad question is that there is a lot of feedback to be had, and it would all depend on what your particular question is. And if you'd like to, have a consult with me to talk more about some questions that you might have and our experience with how it's been handled with by other notified bodies or how we've handled it for our clients, I'm happy to talk about that.
Yes, definitely. Reach out to us at consult@Criterion Edge if you would like to book a meeting. And we have time for one last question. Here it is. Which databases and search engines can be used to find clinical data?
The IVDR and MDR, and in fact, MedDev Rev 4, most particularly, have particular requirements about this. And when we remediate and rewrite, if you will, new clients' CERs that have been written before, this is one of the biggest areas that we have to remediate and completely redo, because we find a lot of shortcuts or inadequate methodology has been employed by some of our clients in CERs and PER, or CERs especially, in the past. And then it gets in front of the notified body and they can't, they don't have confidence in the data based on your methodological rigor. So that's the core issue. If your database searches and methodology and how you did your searches when you are pulling data are not very, very well described and even reproducible within your CER and PER, then you get to the point to where your notified body may be questioning your data itself, and you don't want to be in that position. So this is one of the areas in which you should pay the most attention to. So what databases and search engines can be used to find clinical data? It's easy to say first what you shouldn't be using. The internet is not acceptable. PubMed is not good, but it's better than nothing. But if you're searching PubMed on the internet, because remember, there's only so many search criteria terminologies that can be used. It supports the and the or mesh terminology and really nothing else. So what the notified bodies are looking for is really very rigorous medical librarian mesh terminology, very good syntax in your search protocols. And they're looking at a minimum, and MedDev actually calls this out, Embase and Medline. So they like to see those two at a minimum. And that's been our experience. We use a platform called ProQuest Dialogue. Our librarian and our systematic literature review team uses ProQuest Dialogue. We use Distiller for appraising and reviewing. So I say don't spare your methodology here. It could bite you in the CER and PER. This is a very important part of the CER and PER.
Thank you so much, Lori. We hope that we were able to answer most of your questions today, but please send us any other questions that you have to consult@criterionedge.com. And a quick link to scheduling your free consult right away will be shared in the chat box, or you can request one at the same email. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us and for your wonderful questions. Take care and have a nice day.